Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to be here today with you all at the Scholars Hub at Home. My name is Allison Gampel and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Programs at York University. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is part of our Scholars Hub speaker series and features timely and relevant educational lectures by academics and researchers from York. We're pleased to be able to bring the series online to allow even more alumni and friends to hear from some of the university's leading scholars. This lecture will also be available on our YouTube channel, so you can share it with friends and family. As this event is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same space, I do recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. We begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We are grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. Some exciting news from York. For 20 years, the Bryden Alumni Awards have celebrated alumni who have changed the world for the better. The tradition of recognizing their contributions will continue at the York University Alumni Celebration, honoring 20 years of Bryden Awards, which is going to be a virtual event on November 19th at 7 p.m., where we will bring together 20 years of award winners together with York's global community of alumni, friends, students, and leaders for an entertaining and inspiring evening. We're so thrilled that we're able this year to offer complimentary tickets, and we hope that you all can attend this event. If you'd like to RSVP today, please visit alumniandfriends.yorku.ca/Bryden. In other exciting news, the university recently announced a $10 million gift from the R.P. Brady Family Foundation towards the creation of the university's new Markham Center campus, which is set to open in 2023. In recognition of this generous gift, the atrium in the new campus building will be named after the Brady family. Before we begin today's lecture, which we're about to get underway, we always like to get to know our audience by asking you a question. A poll should pop up on your screen, and it's going to ask you, how would you rate your understanding of today's topic? So I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Great. Thank you all for participating. And it looks like the bulk of us are pretty new, which is not surprising given this time is unprecedented. I know I would fall into the bucket of people with not as much knowledge as I'd like to have. So I'm certainly very excited to welcome our speaker and to get our presentation underway. Just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, if you do need any help with the Zoom webinar, please feel free to click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and enter your question. We have a team in the background that is ready to help you. That same Q&A button can be used to submit questions for our guest speaker. And if you type in your questions, I'll ask them on your behalf. For any of you who are watching live on Facebook, please feel free to submit your questions or comments through the comment section for the video, and the team will send them my way as well. So on to today's talk. It is titled Youth Dating During the Pandemic, and we are featuring Dr. Sarah Flicker. Dr. Flicker is a full professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University. She holds a research chair in Community Based Participatory Research. Her research focuses on adolescent health promotion and engages youth and allied actors in environmental, sexual, and reproductive justice scholarship and activism. Welcome, Sarah. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks. It's a treat to be here. Welcome, everybody. It's always kind of a bit of a funny thing to be talking into a camera without seeing your beautiful faces as well. So bear with me as I, wander my way through this good time. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see my little presentation, and I hope to talk. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to talk today about youth dating during the pandemic. And as you can see, right from this very image, how much our lives have changed in the past 6 months. The fact that people would even go on a date and, put on a mask and make sure it's outside. These are all things that we're getting used to doing so that we can continue to be social and connect with each other and also mitigate risk. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about today. So I'm sure by now you're all familiar with the discussion of what does it mean to flatten a curve, and what does it mean to be thinking about this pandemic in our current moment. So last March or late February, we saw the first cases of COVID in Canada. And what became very clear is that our numbers were rising, and they were rising fast, much like they were elsewhere in the world. And so very quickly, what happened was many of our institutions and many of our ways of life rapidly changed. And the big change that I'm going to talk a lot about today is we closed schools last spring. And this had huge ramifications on young people's lives. All of a sudden, parks were off limits because we didn't at the time know whether they would be safe. Schools were closed, shopping malls were closed, all the kinds of recreation centers were closed. And so for the first time in many of their lives, young people were really cloistered at home and isolated from many of their peers, their extended family members, and the kinds of supports that might be available to them out in the community. And this was a really tough time. As you can see from the graph here, in terms of what's happening in Canada today, we were really lucky that we were able to get our pandemic under control over the summer. Our numbers were really low, but of course, as everything began to reopen and we moved a lot of our social gatherings inside, we're in what many people are calling the second wave now. Luckily, schools have not closed, but at the time that I did this particular data collection that I'm going to talk about, it was last June. So I wanted to kind of remind us historically about what was happening in our lives last June after months of closure. So, oops. I talked about how everything has changed. So much has changed. So it's not even just the idea that we're wearing masks and we're going outside and our approaches to recreation have changed and we're thinking twice about who we see and how we see them and how we talk to them. But the most intimate parts of our lives have changed. So I want you to consider kissing. Probably the most innocent, romantic, lovely gesture that you could imagine. And many a teenager has fallen in love and experienced their first kiss. And for most of us, that was a nice experience. Not one that you would call super risky. For most parents or teachers or concerned adults, we would talk about kissing as a very low risk activity, very low risk romantic activity to show affection. And when we think about kissing today, it has whole new meaning. All of a sudden, it involves taking off masks. It involves very close proximity. There's no ability to social distance. We're breathing on each other. And all of a sudden, this very innocent and sweet and lovely and ubiquitous romantic gesture is now so anxiety provoking in terms of thinking about, should we take that risk or shouldn't we take that risk? So the dating landscape has changed radically. And when we can even think of just like kissing as an idea, we can see that huge shift. And the other behavior where things have really changed a lot is around sexting. Now, prior to last March, if you had asked any most teachers, most parents, certainly police officers, all advised young people to never sext. Do not send nude pictures of yourself. Careful what you write, because anything you divulge or share through a cell phone can be shared widely with others. You have no control. Once it's out there, it's out there. And there was a lot of emphasis put on in school curriculum to teach kids about the dangers of sexting, of never sharing pictures or videos because of the risks to themselves and potentially the risks of criminal charges of anybody who has images of young people on their own devices, right? So there's layers of complication here. And yet you see what's happening now over the course of the pandemic is that our behaviors have so radically moved online that for many young people, the only way they're able to be romantic or sexual with their partner right now is mediated by technology. And so when we think of what was a very high risk activity 6 months ago, well, maybe, is it so bad today? And is it so bad from what perspective? And when we think about harm and harm reduction and think about what are the risks of various sexual activities, we have to think about it are the risks of what? So sexting obviously is very low risk in terms of transmitting bodily fluids and acquiring any infectious disease. But obviously it comes with its own set of risks that are social or emotional risks or legal risks that still need to be considered. But in terms of thinking about what does dating look like today, I want you to kind of hold on to those two ideas of just how much and how short a time our ideas about the kinds of behaviors and the kinds of ways that we're dating and we're engaging in romantic relationships have shifted radically in such a short period of time. We also know that COVID has had a tremendous impact on people's mental health. Certainly we know rates of anxiety, depression have skyrocketed. School closures really exacerbated that and feelings of isolation. We know that young women and queer youth were disproportionately impacted, and we saw globally huge spikes in gender-based and family violence under quarantine measures. So when people were cloistered at home, stuck at home, and had very little outside world engagement, stress went up. Abusers felt emboldened because there were no repercussions because no one would see what they were doing. And we know that a lot of young people really, really were suffering. At the same time as all of this increased morbidity was being experienced, we also had really limited access to the kinds of valuable community supports that would normally be in place, like talking to your school counselor or going to an after-school program where someone might care about you, or even accessing healthcare or sexual and reproductive services. So it was kind of a perfect storm for a really difficult time. So during this period, last June, my postdoctoral student and I decided we wanted to really understand what does it mean for teen girls to be experiencing their first relationships during a global pandemic? What did that look like? How are they feeling about it? What were their thoughts and what was going on romantically for teen girls? And in particular, we were concerned with sexist, sexual, and social pressures that already existed pre-COVID and how they were being exacerbated during COVID, how notions of surveillance and heightened surveillance, because all of a sudden, if you're not going anywhere and you're always home, everybody's kind of always watching you. You're exposed to much more surveillance, and also all the safety of the lockdown measures. So inability to access public space. So what does that mean? Can you even imagine being a teenager and trying to have your first romantic escapades under these very trying and difficult times? So what we do know is that even pre-COVID, so this research was done, I'm reporting on research here mostly done in 2018. And these were large surveys of teen girls in the US and Canada. We found that 50% of teen girls reported spending most of their recreational time online. So even before COVID, young women and teen girls spend a lot of time online. And the app that they were most likely to be using in 2018, this might have changed a little bit, was Snapchat. 8% of teens reported that they dated someone that they met online, but over 50% engaged in online flirting behaviors. Teen girls are both more likely to send sex and receive unwanted or unsolicited sex, and most often in the form of what they're calling dick pics, than teen boys. So I offer this as a little bit of background because some of the results I'm going to share, some of these patterns were already in place pre-COVID. It's not like online dating was a new thing, or maintaining or beginning relationships online wasn't happening before. It obviously was happening before. It's just when the world shut down and everyone got stuck in their house, this was the only way that youth could connect with other people, and the only way that many of them had for beginning and maintaining relationships at a time when they were super bored and had little else to do. So we decided we wanted to talk to them more about it. And this is a very preliminary study. It's a small study. And what we did was we did 3 focus groups with teen girls aged 16 to 19 in June 2020. And we wanted to explore their dating and relationship experiences during the early COVID lockdown. We are going to be repeating the same study at 2 more time points. So we're going to be doing this again in November, and then again likely next March, to kind of look at cross-sectionally how this changes over time. But this is going to give you a little snapshot of what was going on for teen girls last June. So one of the things they told us was that pre-COVID, they were mostly meeting potential romantic partners in person. So as one of the participants says, there's like a talking stage before a relationship. And normally what happens is like you talk online, but then you don't really make things official until you meet in person. So online was a way of connecting with people either before or after you met with them in person, but nothing really serious transpired until you had a chance to actually connect with someone in person. But during lockdown, of course, all our relationships were mediated online. I'm sure many of you also were Zooming at home with people to replace those in-person interactions many people were craving. And so, as this other participant said, now I guess because of COVID and stuff, people can't meet up. So it's causing like less relationships, but not no relationships, because people are still kind of getting together online. So a lot of people talked about how online flirting became a way to pass the time. It was something to do when there was little else to do. And because it was sort of a pastime or a game, the rules were a little bit blurry because people didn't really know, like, what were the repercussions? So as the quote in red here says, I know some of my friends who are single right now, they're kind of looking for people to pass the time with. They're like, hey, I'm bored, I'm lonely, I'm single, you're single, let's talk. So I think that non-serious relationships are really common, especially right now. And the participant in yellow here, you can see, is saying, I feel like some kind of perceive this period as like, you can do whatever you want. And then after that, like it ends, like this is an isolated time. And then after the pandemic is over, like whatever you did before has no effect on you and you can go back to life as normal. So kind of that, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So people are thinking about this pandemic time and this quarantine time as this weird little time out of their regular life where they can experiment and play at romance in ways that they probably wouldn't at any other time in their life. And that involved taking really different kinds of risks online and putting themselves out there in ways that they probably wouldn't do again in the future. But the challenge with this is that the rules really aren't very clear. And so here you see a participant talking about, so this guy added me on Snapchat and it was cool and I was chatting with him. And then we ended up forming a very intricate bond. And, you know, she goes on to talk about how they fell for each other. And it was the beginning of a lovely little relationship. And then he said something like, my phone got taken away and that was it. It was like really shady. And I haven't talked to him in 2 months and he hasn't even opened any of my Snapchats. He just like cut out. And so a lot of you talk about this experience as just being ghosted, like someone who was there one day and just disappears from your life. And you're like, did I do anything wrong? What happened? I don't understand. You know, we were having this relationship and then all of a sudden it's gone. And in particular, because so many of these girls were so invested in this online world and so isolated and seeking connection, they would have these very intense little kind of mini relationships where they would feel a sense of social intimacy and connection. And so when someone just ghosted them, and there were no repercussions for ghosting because you were never going to meet this person in real life, then there was a lot of hurt, because all of a sudden something you believed was there and the intimacy that was growing all of a sudden just disappears. And that was a very painful experience that a lot of girls talked about. For those who were in relationships when the shutdown happened, they often talked about how pre-COVID being in a relationship was super fun. It was exciting. There was a lot of physicality to it. People talked about enjoying hooking up with their partners, which is a very normal part of adolescent dating. But during lockdown, the whole experience felt very difficult, stressful, and confusing. So the participant who you see in blue here says there are days when you have a bad day and you can't see them. Like you can't be there to give you a hug or sit down and talk to you. So they were really missing that connection of having their loved one be there as a source of support. And for teenagers, especially who are under heightened surveillance, there was no way of getting that physical support if they were in households where that wasn't allowed. In red, you see here a young person talking about, like, if you have a bad connection or like your Wi-Fi is out, then you're not able to connect with that person. So all of a sudden you're really dependent on all of these other mechanisms and media, including, and one participant was like, oh, my boyfriend's phone got taken away. So, well, then you really have no way of connecting with them. And here you see in green, right now I'm not able to see my boyfriend. You can't go see that person unless you're going to hurt yourself or risk hurting yourself if you want to see that person. And it's sort of sad and it's not really that fun. And a lot of you talked about feeling this tremendous burden of responsibility for keeping not only themselves safe, but their partner safe, their partner's family safe, their family safe. And that even if they were willing to take the risk for their own gratification, how worried they were about what the repercussions might be for their extended families. So there was this added kind of burden for thinking through consequences and decisions. So one of the pieces we really found was that attending to the importance of young people's romantic lives and validating their very real pain is really necessary for opening up lines of communication and promoting mental health. And as we move into month 9 of our COVID reality, how can we begin to rethink risk and possible harm reduction? Conventionally around sexual and reproductive health in terms of the risks associated with their kissing or sexting. How do we help them have romantic relationships and begin and experiment in these ways, in ways that feel safe for our young people and our families? And, or if not safe, then maybe safer. And here you see this graphic where it's talking about how can you date during a pandemic? Can you start virtually? Can you talk to a potential partner about what their pandemic precautions are looking like? Can you check on where they live and where you live and transmission rates and whether meeting up in person is a good idea? And if you plan on getting intimate, can you import some of the testing stuff that we've been talking about for STIs for years, like getting tested before you meet up? Like, can you get COVID tested and what might that look like? And Toronto Public Health has recently put out their own messaging about this, which I thought was really quite fascinating. It's revised, like just this week in terms of thinking about safer sex during COVID. So sex can be a great way of dealing with anxiety and fulfilling and expressing our needs for intimacy. And it's important for our mental health and well-being. Like sexuality is a really important part of our lives. But lots of people are asking, but is it safe to have sex during COVID? And what does that look like? So always thinking about within a harm reduction model, your safest partner is obviously yourself, and masturbation is a very low risk activity. And this is something I think is a really important message for young people, that masturbation is always a viable option, that is a very safe option, and destigmatizing that kind of self-loving behavior. Your next safest partner is someone you live with, and that, for many adults who are married, obviously, or cohabitating with their partner, like that's a real viable option. For most teenagers, that's really not a viable option. So how can you consider lower risk activities, like perhaps thinking about video dates or virtual sex or sexting as alternatives to meeting in person? And this is where we're really getting into that gray zone of what does that mean when we're talking about 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. And then, of course, if you are going to meet people in person, can you find more creative ways? I'm thinking about positions and that don't put people face to face, that reduce the flow of breathing on each other and saliva, and so limiting kind of that innocent kissing behavior we were talking about earlier, and considering alternative positions that would not facilitate face-to-face interactions. So the public health landscape has changed so radically in such a short period of time. It's really impacted all parts of our lives, including sexuality. And one of the key messages here for thinking about youth and young people, and particularly teen girls, is that we have to keep in mind that sexual and romantic relationships are a really important part of growth and development, and are a really important part of being a human being. And how can we imagine ways to talk frankly with young people and to support them in thinking through how they can reduce harms and still begin and maintain relationships safely during this period. So I definitely want to thank my brilliant postdoctoral fellow, Alana Goldstein, for her leadership on this research, and the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, as well as the York Research Chair Program, for supporting me. And I'm delighted to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flicker. What a informative and interesting presentation. And it just occurs to me just how much has changed from June to now, and what's going to evolve as we go forward. There's so many questions swimming in my mind. So thank you for taking the time for doing this work and for volunteering your time to be with us and share it to a wider community. We really, really appreciate you.
My pleasure.
So in terms of next steps, we are able to take questions from our audience. And so just to give you a little bit about how to do that, you can ask any questions that you have by using the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen. I see some comments coming in. Please feel free to put questions there if you are together with us on Zoom. For those of you who are on Facebook, please submit your questions using the comment box for this video. So as you ask your questions, I will read them out loud to Sarah, and then she can answer them for you. Okay, if you have any questions about that, then feel free again to type into the Q&A. So I'll start with a question, which is, and it's interesting. I look onto a park, and at night I see all these teens who seem to be congregating without their masks. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, how seriously are youth taking the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. This was a very small scale study that we did. We talked to 25 teenagers last spring. At the time, this particular group of 25 teenagers were taking things very, very seriously. And my sense is, from reading the literature and also engaging with much larger groups of teens over the summer, is that they are taking it seriously. I mean, this is impacting every aspect of their lives. Like, they're not able to go to school in regular ways anymore. They have to wear masks in order to be indoors. Their freedoms are severely curtailed. Their job opportunities are highly limited. So I think teenagers are taking it really seriously. I think teenagers are teenagers, and they're going to test boundaries, and they're going to feel invincible because they're teenagers, and the risks to themselves are comparatively much lower than the risks to their community around them. But a lot of the young women we talk to really shared how they were deeply worried about how their own behaviors were impacting those around them. So I don't think there's like a one size fits all, but I will say that generally youth are deeply concerned and taking it very seriously.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I do want to just address before we continue with the Q&A that for our audience, there has been some choppy internet, and we do apologize for the choppy internet. We are working to improve it, so just bear with us as we go through another little while of Q&A. Okay, so we have Gwen who's saying, I worry about teens who miss these days when they should be dating and instead go home to get online. And, you know, as a mom of tweens, I certainly can relate to Gwen's feelings that, you know, this is sad that this time, and definitely cause for worry. And then Bandel has a good question, and I'm gonna read the question to you. Bandel says, thank you for this presentation. My understanding is that sharing any form of sexual content involving a minor is considered illegal, like circulation of child porn laws. Are teens engaging in sexting at risk of being reported and convicted of illegal behavior? And if so, how can this risk be mitigated for teens?
Yeah, I think that's a very real concern. Yes, you're right. It's against the law, right? Sharing any kind of naked media, picture, video of a minor is against the law. So, and particularly, if this is even more worrying if there's asymmetry in the relationship in terms of age, if it's an adult and a minor, which, you know, which sounds like disastrous, but sometimes, you know, someone who's 17 and someone who's 18 fall in love, right? So we have to think about that, and it is important to share with our young people that there are risks, there are legal risks, and there are risks to anybody who both sends the media or receives that media and has it on your phone. So how can you be creative about sexting without necessarily sharing images? So like that's something you could talk about, and you know, there's all kinds of ways you can talk about your body, using words, using your voice that doesn't necessarily show any images, and that could be considered sexting too. You know, so I think there's ways we can think about harm reduction within this milieu of virtual or mediated relationship building. But I think you know, our conversations around like what harms are we mitigating need to be really thought through a little bit more carefully and in a more nuanced fashion than 6 months ago, when like the messaging was really quite draconian and clear, like don't do this, it's against the law, you will get arrested, to now maybe perhaps if this is the only way you can safely engage in a relationship, how can you do that within the confines of the law, where you're not necessarily sharing pictures of body parts, but short stories or little tweets or even pictures in a bathing suit that would be, you know, within the confines of the law.
Those are good suggestions, and I'm just wrapping my head around how to actually have that conversation with my children, or whether to invite you over to my backyard.
With our masks on.
With our masks on. So there's a question coming in for Harvey, and it's an interesting one. He asks, if we were back in the dark ages of pre-internet, like when we were kids, no Snapchat, would the mental health and sexuality of teens be better or worse? Crystal ball.
That's such a hard question. I don't know how to answer that question if we were back in the dark ages. What I do know is that there are certain behaviors online that are better or worse for your mental health. So connecting with friends is really important. It's really important for our mental health and having that connection. So using features like, you know, video chatting to connect with people has been a huge mental health saver for so many youth who are so isolated. We also know that like Instagram and Facebook and social media, where you are trying to get likes on your profile, can be very harmful for adolescent mental health. So it's not like the phone is one thing. It can be used in all of these different ways. Then some are health promoting and some are health inhibiting. And I think as caring adults in young people's lives, it is important that we have conversations with our young people about what apps they're using, how they're using them, how they're feeling about them. And also sort of a pat answer, but it's like a little of this, a little of that, who knows?
I hear you. Thank you. You know what, Sarah, we're having some connection issues. Do you want to stop sharing your screen? It might fix things a little bit and we can take the time for a few more questions.
Sure.
Let's see if that's better. Okay. So I'm gonna take a question from Dana, and I think it really sort of builds nicely on what you were just talking about. Dana asks, how do we create messaging around safer sex during COVID and in general without alienating youth? As someone who works with youth, I know that a lot of teens have been making fun of the current messaging coming from the government and seeing them as cringy, awkward, and funny.
I think almost all public health messaging about sex is cringy, awkward, and funny. Like, when have you ever seen anybody deliver a sexual health anything to a group of teenagers and it hasn't evoked some of those emotions? So I think a lot of adults are super uncomfortable talking about sex and are even more uncomfortable trying to have frank discussions with kids. So I don't think that's specifically a COVID problem. What I hope is that COVID is normalizing different kinds of conversations that are applicable also then to our sexual lives. So when we talk about thinking about who maybe we are bubbling with or who our family is considering bubbling with, like, are there people that maybe you see more often? Like, the kinds of questions you should be talking about is, you know, where are you going? What other people are you seeing? Where do you have your mask on? Where do you have your mask off? How big is your bubble? Like, those are great questions for practicing talking about who we're going to have sex with later in our lives. Like, who else are you sleeping with? Are you using condoms with those people? What forms of birth control are you using, right? So conversations about consent writ large, and conversations where we're really thinking about how do we have difficult conversations about personal issues and personal behaviors that make us vulnerable, that share maybe some of the things we're a little less proud of. Like, maybe you did go to that party last week and you should have been wearing a mask and you didn't, and you feel a little bit bad about it and you feel guilty about it. But that is a very similar set of emotions to having unprotected sex or not using birth control. And the more we can get comfortable kind of talking about these issues so that we can then mitigate those risks and talk about how we can support each other to make better decisions as we kind of move forward, or make decisions that feel better for ourselves, it's kind of about flexing that muscle, or that to get really good at being a little uncomfortable and having the awkward conversation. And maybe it's funny, and maybe we just need to laugh about it, because it is ridiculous. Like, who would have ever thought Toronto Public Health is basically putting out messaging that's like, doggy style, everybody, like, that's what to do. Like, we would have never imagined this 6 months ago. But this has opened up like a very new possibility. I was just reading the New York City Department of Public Health was talking about how glory holes were a great harm reduction option, like sheets with little holes that you could put your phallus through as a option for lower risk sexual activity. Again, like, who, unheard of 6 months ago that mainstream public health institutions would be advocating this kind of creative sexual play. And maybe that's not like where we go immediately with teenagers, but it is important to be like, what are the diversity of ways you can express yourself sexually? And how can we think of which ways are the scariest or the most risky, and which ways are the least risky in our current pandemic moment that might change like 6 months from now if we have a vaccine? Because things will change, I hope.
Right, right. So in the interim, I mean, I think this is really, really interesting for that 16 to 19-year-old group that you studied. Any thoughts on messaging or recommendations for kind of those younger kids who you certainly, don't necessarily younger kids, and also older people? And a question came in from one of our audience members asking about how does this all apply to, the next group, to those in their 20s and early 30s. And, you know, I think dating, love, romance is important at every point of life. So how does this apply beyond our, you know, the age group that you studied? If you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm totally fascinated by this idea of dating and this idea of risk, and how our notions of risks have totally changed. Like, who would have ever thought that you would think twice before going to visit your parents, right? Like, that you would think twice about, oh, how crowded is this park, right? Like, our whole lives are now being navigated through this different lens of risk. And I think, again, it's the same, fundamentally, it's the same thing. It's what choices can I be making in this current moment that are going to be the best for my mental and physical health, and also those around me? And how do I openly and honestly have this conversation with the other partner? And I often get the question, pre-COVID, I used to get the question all the time, like, how do I know when I'm ready for sex, from teenagers? This was like a very common question. And I always said to teenagers, look, you never really know if you're ready or not ready. But a good rule of thumb would be, are you able to give yourself pleasure and communicate what feels good to the person that you are potentially considered getting sexual with? And will that person listen to you? And if the answer to all those things is yes, then maybe you can begin to experiment sexually with each other in ways that feel safe until it doesn't. But if you've already practiced that communication, then it should be easy to say, hey, I liked that, but I didn't like that, or I'm not ready for that, and I'm not comfortable for that, and can we please try something different? And I think that those rules apply to dating at all levels and at all ages. And we really need to practice that assertiveness skill to navigate the kind of sexual and romantic lives that we would like.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It answers, you know, one of the questions that came in about how we can support teen girls to be in safe, positive relationships. It sounds like that's what it's really all about, is being assertive, being able to communicate, and doing it with a partner that you can have those conversations with. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, so you have to be confident about saying it, but also be hopeful that this other person will hear what you have to say. And
right, absolutely. One more question before we get close to wrapping it up. Bandel also asked, do you plan on interviewing teen boys and comparing the results to teen girls?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, definitely. It's interesting, when we did this call out for teenagers, we had boy groups and we had girl groups, and young men didn't step forward. So a lot of girls wanted to talk about dating, and we only had one guy who came to, we scheduled 3 focus groups for each, and we only had one guy turn up. So it is interesting. I think maybe our recruitment methods have to be a little bit more creative to reach out to young men, because I think there's an important group of people to hear from. And in our next iteration, we're working on pulling together some advisory committee of youth to kind of help us think creatively about how we can get more people engaged and involved. So, great question.
Wonderful. Well, we hope that if and when that research gets done, that you'll come back and join us here at another Scholars Hub and share what's next. It would be definitely interesting to hear a part 2 on this presentation.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for sharing it with our community. I'll just read a thank you coming in from one of our audience members. Super informative and very interesting. Thank you for the work that you do. And I think that about sums it up for us. We are incredibly grateful and appreciate you being here, and look forward to hearing more from you.
My absolute pleasure. I could talk about this all day. So thank you for engaging and for these fantastic questions. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
All right, thank you. And I just got to have a few more items to say before we say goodbye to our audience. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. As we asked you before we started the session, we want to ask you again a poll that should pop up on your screen. The question is, how would you rate your understanding of today's topic following this discussion? So just take a moment or two to answer the poll if you don't mind. Thank you. So thank you for participating. As I said earlier, this talk was recorded, so it will be posted on the York University Alumni YouTube channel. And you're welcome to view it and to share it with others. Please feel free to join our LinkedIn group or follow us on Facebook by searching York University Alumni. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at YorkU Alumni. Facebook, or chat about this and any other programming. We love to hear from you. We love hearing what you want to learn about next. We love hearing your feedback and thoughts on this presentation. I do, again, want to apologize for the technical difficulties that we experienced. We're all new to working in this world, and thank you for bearing with us and staying here. If you happen to be a professor at York and are interested in presenting your research at a Scholars Hub, please feel free to reach out to us as well at alumni@yorku.ca is where all of you can connect with us. Our Scholars Hub at Home lineup for November is ready to share with you. It starts next week with something that is very exciting, well, hopefully exciting. Claim the vote, claim the country on the question 2020 US elections. So on Wednesday at noon Eastern time, we'll have Dr. Anna I'm not going to pronounce that. Dr. Anna, Professor, Department of Politics, Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. And she's going to be joined by Adam, who's a PhD candidate in the Department of Politics, Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. We'll then take a week off to honor Remembrance Day. We'll return to you on November 18th and again on November 25th. And the 25th conversation might be interesting to this group. It'll feature Dr. Deborah Pepler lecturing on bullying, aggression, and other forms of violence, especially among young people who are marginalized and alienated. So to register or get more details, please visit our website, yorku.ca/alumni and friends, and click on events. That should show up on screen. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe, be well, and follow the public health guidelines. Bye-bye.